we all agree that if Israel had a different government, a peace-minded government, it would give us about 3 weeks of grace period, because it is, by a long shot, no longer about what we do, but who we are.
Today is Wednesday, June 3rd. This is Boundless Insights, and I'm Aviva Klompas. It's still unclear whether President Trump will resume military strikes against Iran or manage to broker a negotiated deal with Tehran. Now, for Israel, that uncertainty carries enormous consequences. Because even if Israelis are grateful for President Trump's support and partnership, they still have to confront a difficult question. What happens if Washington makes a deal that Jerusalem can't live with? Now, some of this debate is shaped by the memory of the 2015 Iran deal brokered by President Obama. But it's also shaped by October 7th and its aftermath, which led Israelis to feel that the country must be able to defend itself by itself. And we're seeing that mentality play out in Lebanon, where IDF troops are pushing Hezbollah away from Israel's northern border. Today, we'll consider the lessons of 2015, how Israel can navigate disagreements with a superpower, and what it means to seek greater strategic independence. Joining me is a regular on the show, Dr. Michael Oren. He's an author, historian, and former Israeli ambassador to the United States. Let's get into it. Dr. Michael Oren, welcome back to Boundless Insights.
It is so good to be back.
I've missed you.
I've missed you too, and
It's been too long.
I can't wait to get both of us very deeply depressed and talk about exactly where Israel right now. Okay.
Well, I say go for it. Tell us where we're starting today.
We are at, again, I've been saying this again for how many weeks now, that we're at the hinge of history, where history can go one way, and that way is peace reigning throughout much of the Middle East, peace with Israel and Lebanon, peace with Israel and Syria, peace with Israel, Saudi Arabia, perhaps even peace between Israel and a post-Ayatollah Iran, the restoration of a Pax Americana that extends from the shores of the Mediterranean to the banks of the Ganges, a coward Russia, a coward China. That's one direction. The other direction is a restored, rearmed, revitalized, and very angry Iran that will maintain its proxies, Hamas certainly, but also most poignantly Hezbollah, the Houthis, which will then become sort of the lodestar for countries throughout the Middle East, certainly in the Gulf, who will say, we can't rely on the United States. We're going to have to do a rapprochement, whether we like it or not, with Tehran. And the Russians will conclude what they may conclude with regard to the Baltic states. China will conclude what it might conclude with regard to Taiwan. And everything hinges right now. And the truly unique, and I think that's an understatement, aspect of this moment is it hinges on one man and his decision.
President Donald J. Trump.
Yeah. Who goes into the Situation Room several days ago to make a final decision about the Iran deal and came out 2 hours later without a decision.
No, I don't believe that that's true. I think there is a decision. I think they're not telling us.
There are a number of assumptions here. Okay, one of the
Yes.
assumptions is, as they say in Talmudic thought, the pshat of it is, the simple,
The bottom line.
right? The Occam's razor interpretation of is that the president can no longer stand the pressure exerted on him by the voters who are paying, $1, $1.50 more for gas and more for food, and within the Republican Party, the fear of losing at least one or perhaps two of the houses during the midterm elections, the Europeans who are running out of jet fuel, the U.S. military that's running supposedly out of certain types of munitions, particularly anti-missile defense missiles, and gives in and says, okay, I gotta cut and run. I'm gonna make the best deal I can, kick the can down the road, and focus on Cuba. That's one interpretation. The other interpretation, by the way, this is something that the president himself says, I don't care about the midterms. I don't care about gas prices. I'm committed to seeing this through. And maybe the president says, okay, I'll just keep this blockade on the Hormuz Straits, costing the Iranians an estimated $500 million, $300 million a day, one of the two, until they no longer can pay the salaries of the IRGC. And internally, they begin to crumble. And I'll just keep on, maybe if I even reach an agreement, I can go from 60 days to another 60 days and 60 days until we're past the 250th anniversary of the United States, past the Mondial World Cup, past the midterm elections. And then in the second week of November, I reopen military activity against Iran and crush them.
That's what I think it is. And you've named the three big things on the horizon where he can't have a war. He can't have a war on July 4th because we're having a big party. Can't have a war this summer because we're hosting the World Cup. and can't have a war before the midterms because he'll get punished at the ballot box. But this moment in time reminds me of 2015 because this was the last time that a United States president was conducting negotiations with Iran, where Israel, which is obviously highly impacted with whatever the results of that negotiation are just sitting and waiting to see what happens. Are you getting flashbacks to that moment as well?
No, because then it was nefarious.
Explain.
President Obama made a hard and fast decision to exclude Israel from the negotiations. Here, I don't think it's done out of any malice. I think the president understands that what our positions are, what our concerns are. He has a very open conversation with the prime minister. And I'm told by my sources in Washington that they not only talk about strategic issues, they're actually friends and talk. And as they say, again, in the Talmud about havada, davahad, this and that. And I don't think that President Trump is out to do us in.
Well, that might be true, but the tension is that President Trump may genuinely support Israel. He may genuinely be friends with Bibi, but he could still ultimately make a deal that's in the interest of the United States or in his own political interests. So how does Israel navigate that tension?
Gingerly, in two ways. Okay, first, you do make our interests known. You don't keep quiet. Why would you make an agreement, we should say to the president, that doesn't address the ballistic missile issue? Why would you make an agreement that doesn't address the proxy issue, the supporting of terror? Why would you make an issue that, in essence, according to what's written about the agreement, the draft agreement, that leaves Iran in control of the Strait of Hormuz, even though they're not closing it or taking tolls, and leaves open the question of what's going to happen with the nuclear program, and certainly with the nearly 1,000 pounds of 60% enriched and the several tons of 20% enriched. How do you do that? That is going to walk, and talk like an Iranian victory. And that's the way it's going to be understood by everybody in the Middle East and everybody in the world. And you could try to spin it any way you want to try to spin it, but no one's going to buy it. Nobody cares how many Iranian ships were sunk. They care who, at the end of the day, is still standing and still wielding power. So that's you make that known. And you deal with whatever friends we have left in Congress and the Senate who are standing up, like Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz. But beyond that, we have to enter into an intimate dialogue with this president and his administration, something that we really could not do during the Obama years. Now, prior to Netanyahu's first meeting with Obama after the signing of the JCPOA, and if I get this wrong, I think it was in November of 2016, the first meeting, and I prepared a paper for the prime minister about what he should talk about. And it was a list of requests. What were the requests? Okay, you signed this deal. Now, how can you help better defend us from this deal? And can we agree on what definition of a violation is by Iran? Is it one isotope or two isotopes? And if it's two isotopes, what will be America's response? And what will America let Israel respond? Okay, that type of definition. To what degree can we defend ourselves against Hamas and Hezbollah? And then beyond that, what kind of capabilities can the United States give us that we don't have? Now, I think in this podcast before, I've talked about my efforts to try to get the United States to either sell us or lease us a B-2 bomber.
Yep.
That was in the list. Also in the list, interesting enough, was American recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. So Bibi goes into this meeting, he presents this list to the president, who basically shrugs it off. And when he mentioned the Golan Heights, it actually made the president laugh. I got a chuckle.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
And chuckle.
Because it was so outlandish to President Obama to consider it?
And by the way, it was a very important move because that was the height of the Syrian civil war. And the only thing that was preventing the Syrian civil war from bleeding south into Jordan and the Gulf was the Israeli army on top of the Golan Heights. Made perfect sense. Strategically. Laughed it off. So we're not in that situation with this president. I think this president genuinely cares about our security. I think he would be open to that type of dialogue. Whether they're willing to sell us or lease us a B-52 remains to be seen. Okay, I do think it's a good idea. It sends an unequivocal message to the Iranians. The reason I got back then for why they wouldn't sell us a B-2 was they didn't have enough of them. They said, oh, we only got 18 of them. We can't spare one. I don't know how many they have today, but really the real reason they didn't give it to us is because they know we might use it. And they didn't want that.
Is Israel not able to build its own B-2 bomber?
That's the response I get most over, and I don't know. It's a piece of hardware.
Maybe you already have it.
It's the bomb it carries. That's the most important. It's not the plane, it's the bomb. And you can stick a 30,000-pound bomb on, I've heard, on a Hercules, but that flies very low and very slow, very easy target. It's really the bomb and not the plane. And whenever I requested the B-252, I requested one that that came with all the, the bells and whistles, not just the airplane.
Not the entry-level model. We want the whole thing.
I wanted white walls and leather seating. That's what I wanted. Okay.
That's right.
So that's the type of thing. That's the type of dialogue which I think is absolutely necessary here.
But if you were writing the same memo today to Prime Minister Netanyahu saying, look, President Trump is going to make some sort of deal ultimately, so what should be the back channel requests in order to preserve Israel's security or maintain a strategic independence?
Well, first and foremost, that we maintain total freedom to defend the northern part of the country against Hezbollah, including bombing Beirut. We're not doing this because we wake up in the morning and feel like bombing Beirut. We have to do this. We're going to lose the northern part of the country, but if we lose the northern part of the country, the chance that we can lose the entire country. Because Hezbollah has rockets and drones that can hit Tel Aviv. It's just deciding not to just now. And that has to be done. Now, I don't know if there's a total military solution for Hezbollah. Ultimately, the only solution to Hezbollah is in Tehran by drying them up. But we have to keep on punishing them. We have to create a situation where they are degraded to the point where perhaps the Lebanese military can begin to, clamp down on them. I don't know. But that's a long process, long and painful process. Okay. So that's the type of thing we can do with this. That's the type of direction we can take with this administration that we couldn't do with previous administrations. I'm not even sure we could do it during the Biden administration to the same degree.
Is there anything else in that memo to Prime Minister Netanyahu that you would request?
Again, it's going to come down to capabilities. It's going to come down to intelligence sharing. Can we have access to all the satellite information? What are we going to do about Hamas? Is there a deadline for disarming Hamas in Gaza? At what point do we have a green light to go in there and finish the job?
What about the engagement with other countries? What do you make of these reports that President Trump is insisting that Middle Eastern countries, including Jordan and Egypt, join the Abraham Accords?
Yeah, it's a nice idea. It's just, it ain't going to happen. And it ain't going to happen for a very simple reason. The countries who joined the Abraham Accords joined them because they were convinced that the United States military, its strategic might, stood behind those accords. And if the strategic might in the Middle East stands not behind the United States but behind Iran, then those same countries will be gravitating toward Iran. And it's interesting, with the exception of the UAE, virtually all the Middle Eastern states, even though we're being pummeled by Iran, and even though they have very significant military capabilities, just UAE and Saudi Arabia together have about 900 frontline warplanes. The fact that they didn't use, except for the UAE, UAE didn't use these warplanes, they never struck back at Iran, is saying something. It's saying that they did not trust that the United States was in this for the long run, that the United States would lose its stomach, cut a deal, and leave the Gulf states facing a injured and very vengeful Iran, which they didn't want. Not the first time it's happened in the Middle East. So I don't imagine anybody else is going to be joining the Abraham Accords. I think the Trump people would hate this comparison, but when President Biden came back into office in 2020, his Secretary of State Blinken, his National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, said, no, we are not only going to renew the JCPOA that had been basically canceled by Trump, we're not going to renew it, we're going to seek a longer and stronger agreement. And I remember thinking to myself, yeah, with what leverage? Mm-hmm. With what leverage? You think the Iranians are going to agree to that, out of the goodness of their hearts? Or because you're nicer to them? It doesn't work that way in the Middle East. I don't think it works that way anywhere in the world. I don't even think it works that way between human beings.
Interesting. Let me turn and ask you about the big news of this week, which is that Israel has pushed troops north of the Litani River and recaptured Beaufort Castle. Can you talk to us about why that is such a dramatic move?
Well, it has tremendous historical resonance for Israel and for myself personally. Beaufort Castle was one of the strings of Crusader castles that where you can find along our northern area. Nimrod Castle is another one, Atlit Castle, all these castles. Montfort Castle that guarded the trade routes between what was then, today is Lebanon through the Levant, leading into the Mediterranean. The PLO had its major headquarters up there between 1970 and 1982 and directed missile fire against northern Israel. And in the Peace for Galilee War, now known retrospectively as the First Lebanon War, Israeli forces attacked that area. An elite unit of the Golani Brigade took it. I think 8 members of the Golani reconnaissance unit were killed taking the Beaufort. And thereafter, from 1982 to May of 2000, the forces in Beaufort Castle were subjected to almost daily rocketing by Hezbollah, not the PLO anymore. And a famous movie called Beaufort. You should see it. It's very moving, very disturbing movie about Beaufort.
I have seen it.
And so it has a tremendous resonance for us. For me personally, because I participated in the 1982 action in Lebanon in that war. And then thereafter, I probably spent a year of my life in and around Beaufort Castle. And it was always there, looming over us as a reminder of the dangers of southern Lebanon that it posed to Israel if that castle was in the wrong hands. So taking it back has, I think, more of a symbolic value than it has a strategic value. There are other high areas around that area in that southern Lebanon, and that countries around the world are expressing some type of disturbance about this. I don't get it. I don't get it. But then again, if you read the New York Times, they'll just talk about how we've displaced 1 million Lebanese and we're taking more and more territory to Lebanon because that's what we wake up in the morning. That's what we want to do. They do not mention that Hezbollah has fired something in the order of 7,000 rockets and drones against Israel. They don't report when Israeli soldiers were killed.
If you're going to talk about the New York Times, then what obviously comes to mind is the Christoph story and the absurdity of the Israeli rape dogs. And let's just talk about the implications beyond the Middle East. When I'm out in the world, probably the foremost question that I get asked at the moment is people saying to me, Jews saying to me, the actions of the Netanyahu government are making it unsafe for me here in the United States. Now, I reject that notion. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are about it. But we are watching this disturbing surge in anti-Semitism, including violent anti-Semitism, and we're watching articles, ideas, statements that are conspiratorial, defamatory, poorly sourced, just getting amplified as if they are true. There's these open conversations about Jewish money or Zionist control that travel through mainstream conversation casually. So what do you make of this? And I guess my bigger question is, do you think that Jews around the world need to be thinking more seriously about making aliyah?
We got about 2 hours to answer this?
We have about 2 minutes.
Okay, really, that's okay. I don't know if I can do this in 2 minutes, but here it is. I used to say to the prime minister about actions taken by the Israeli government during the Obama years, and I used to say, Obama has a knife to our heart. We don't have to go like this. We don't have to help push that knife in. That's what people like Ben Gvir do, and much do, and the violent settlers, the small group of violent settlers in Judea and Samaria. This is what they do. But among my friends, my colleagues who are deeply engaged in this struggle, we all agree that if Israel had a different government, a peace-minded government, it would give us about 3 weeks of a grace period, because it is, by a long shot, no longer about what we do, but who we are. We could create a Palestinian state in the West Bank tomorrow, redivide Jerusalem. Ultimately, it's not going to make much of a difference. And we all agree on this, by the way, right, left, up, and down. Because what's happened in the world has nothing whatsoever to do with the reality in this country. There was an op-ed by Senator Von Hallen the other day in the New York Times where he said that the United States has to cut off $4 billion in aid every year, and that will force Israel to create a Palestinian state in the West Bank. What universe does this person live in? For $4 billion a year, not only are we going to sell our homeland, but we're going to create a Palestinian state which 75% of Israelis view as a mortal threat. We're going to do that. So the Israel of the mind has nothing to do, in America, elsewhere, has nothing to do with the real Israel. And what's gone on is that, 80 plus years after the Holocaust, anti-Semitism was back in fashion. And the world has not changed. The world's reverted to form. It's the world that my grandparents, my great-grandparents knew very well. Okay, the world is anti-Semitic. And it's out of the bottle. It's not going anywhere. And it's taken on, I wrote an article for the Free Press a couple of weeks ago called Defending Israel in the Age of American Madness. It's taken on a deranged character. Someone sent me a TikTok video the other day of a group of young Americans dressed like in Westport, Connecticut, WASP, blonde-haired, blue-eyed kids. And they're sitting around and going like this, Allahu Akbar, free Palestine, free Palestine. And having this huge party. Allahu Akbar. That's where we are. Has nothing to do with us. Again, we could have an extreme left-wing government. It's not going to change. This is about what's happening in the West. It's about a deep self-loathing, about a deep, profound self-doubt in the West, and looking for excuses, looking for something to latch onto, and that is hatred of the Jews. Wow, there's a unique thought. There is nothing, Aviva, about the contemporary anti-Semitism that is new. Everything is straight out of the Middle Ages. Because when I go on the BBC and they talk about how we've killed 70,000 Palestinians and how we've displaced 1 million Lebanese and how we've killed children and women, behind all those accusations is a fundamental belief that the Jews are evil. You have people running for Congress for whom Israel is the source of all evil in the world. Everything that's gone wrong in the United States is because of Israel. There's a unique thought. No one's ever said that before. And so, all right, we've lived through not decades, but centuries of this. And we will live through it again. I tire of the lachrymose response to it. And that is, I'm tired of the oi. And it's about time we toughen up and become Israelis and Zionists and Jews. Now, does that mean, the Jews should pick up and leave wherever they are in the diaspora? Depends where. I've been to Australia, I've been to Canada. The leaders of those communities don't necessarily think that those communities have a future. And so Aliyah is a very serious option for them, because where else are you going to go? You want to go to Mamdani's New York, or perhaps London, or Paris. For American Jews, I think that a diaspora is a national strategic interest of the state of Israel. We need a strong diaspora. We don't want to see the diaspora disappear. But we must be ready. Now, I don't know anybody in my family in America was thinking of making Aliyah, for that matter, because of anti-Semitism. They'll stay and fight as they stood and fight in previous generations until they couldn't, all right, until you somehow had to leave. They should stay and fight, but fight they should. And enough of the hand-wringing, enough of the oi, enough of that lachrymose approach to Jewish history. Toughen up, Jews, and give them hell.
Perfect way to end. Toughen up and give them hell. Michael, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
That's a wrap on today's episode of Boundless Insights. Whether you've been with us from the start or are just discovering our show, we're so glad you're here. If today's conversation sparked a question, challenged your thinking, or made you shake your head, I want to hear from you. Email me at podcast@boundlessisrael.org. Your feedback gives us ideas for new topics and new guests. And if you believe these conversations matter, there are 3 ways to support the show. First, hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. Second, help us spread the word. Share an episode with friends and family, post about it, or mention it in a group chat. It really does make a difference. And third, consider supporting our work. Boundless is a nonprofit, and we rely on donors to keep the show going. You can make a gift at boundlessisrael.org/donate. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep the conversation going.